116-4822-086, or equally you can text or WhatsApp in on 077 488 55055. Alternatively, you can chat through Facebook on Ramadan Radio FM. So, as always, and before I introduce my guests of tonight, I would like to thank the team at Ramadan Radio, because without them, this show would not be possible. I would like to thank my guests, because again, without them, we would not have this show. And I would also like to thank my listeners and viewers, without whom none of this would be possible. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my guest of this evening, Rashida Seedat. And she is being accompanied by her daughter, Alia. I hope I've said that correctly, Alia. And Alia may or may not be talking. She's still considering. I may or may not have a question for her. But today's show is centered around a few items, one of them being domestic abuse and something known as Clare's Law disclosure. So we will go into that in a bit more detail. Now, I would like to say on the outset that I appreciate that this topic is quite sensitive. It can bring up traumatic memories for most people. So if you are listening and if you are one of those people, then please be rest assured we will do our utmost to respect everybody and everyone who's gone through those experiences, but also for you to know that there are organizations out there who can help you. And that's one of the reasons why we do have Rashida on the show tonight, to go into a little bit more detail and then to explain about what kind of organizations are there to help. So this show tonight is not being conducted in a way to offend anyone. Domestic violence, domestic abuse is a very real concerning issue, not just in our community, but in and around our community. It can happen to our neighbor next door. It can happen to our friends. It can happen to a family member. It can happen to someone very close to us or somebody very far from us. But it's very real and it does need discussing. Hence, Rashida has gladly agreed to join us today. So, Assalamu alaikum, Rashida. First of all, I would like to say thank you for coming on the show. I know how nervous you were, how difficult a topic it is to talk about. But as explained to our listeners and our viewers, that we will be respectful and we will be mindful, and we don't wish to trigger anyone's emotions or traumatic events, but that should they need those organizations for help, we will explain that to them. Okay. So Rashida, could you please give us a little bit of background as to who you are?
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you for inviting me onto your program today. So my name is Rashida Seedat, and as you've said, it is the first time ever that I am live on a radio show. So I am a little bit nervous. So just bear with me, please, as I may talk a little bit too fast or a bit too slow. So with regards to a little bit of information about myself, I was born in Yorkshire. I moved to Leicester over 20 years ago, and I have lived in Leicester since then. I completed my undergraduate law degree and postgraduate studies here in Leicester. I currently work part-time for a law firm in Leicester that specialises in family law, and as a result, I often work with women who have been victims of domestic violence and who have sought protective orders via the civil courts. I have 3 children, and my daughter Alia is here with me today. And I have another 2 children who are at home. All my children were born and raised in Leicester. I live in the heart of the Asian community in the LE5 area, and as I explained, I have done so for the past 20 years. So I would say I know the area pretty well and the community quite well as well. So as you've rightly explained, my aim for attending the show today is on an informative basis, where I hope to raise awareness about domestic violence and Clare's Law in particular, as well as, discussing other related topics. So before I start, I would just like to say, to reiterate again rather, as you've already explained it, that domestic violence is a very sensitive topic to discuss, and elements of what we will cover today may be upsetting for people who are currently going through or have previously been subjected to abuse. Therefore, I just want to, give a slight trigger warning to alert listeners to the sensitive nature of the content that we will be covering and discussing today. So that's basically a little bit about myself.
Jazakallah, Rashida. As you already know, and as I've already said this, I truly appreciate you coming on tonight's show, and at such last minute as well. It was quite last minute, purely because we needed to make sure that this topic is something that we could address live on radio on 87.7 FM and DAB 9B. We needed to make sure that we crossed all the T's and dotted all of our I's. That's correct. Yes, absolutely. And as Rashida has explained, she is a little bit nervous, but as all of my guests will probably be able to, and I'm hoping all of my guests in the past will be able to confirm, it's a very organic conversation. It's a conversation between you and I. Sometimes we might get callers, sometimes we might get messages and so on. And if so, then we will put them on, I will read them out and so on. So before we get into the topic that we have got you on for tonight's show, I always like to ask my guests, purely because I like to get an understanding of what made them go into this line and so on. So what did you actually want to be when you were growing up? Can you remember?
I actually wanted to go into medicine because I was really interested in saving lives and, working in the medical field. But when I started my A-level, I think it was biology, and then we had to dissect something. I can't remember. I think it was
probably a frog
or something.
It's always a frog.
And then I changed my mind. I thought, well, I really don't like blood. I don't like the sight of it. So then I did A-levels in other subjects, including psychology. And after my A-levels completed, I really wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to go into. But then at the last minute, I chose law. And I'm glad I chose law. I've had a good career in it. It's been interesting. And certainly the field that I work in, I feel like, we help a lot of people as well. So, yeah, it's been a good
Alhamdulillah. I mean, people normally ask me, what made me go into law? Mine was a fluke, if I should say that. I ran a business in my early 20s up to my mid-20s. I was doing immigration because I was doing family cases, friends, ex-husband and so on. And then I was the only one at that time who had a computer, who spoke English because I'm born and bred in England, and only one of the few who was willing to help. So I then got myself qualified as an immigration advisor, and then I ran my own immigration business for a little while. But it does become challenging when people knock on your door 3 o'clock in the morning, demanding for you to help. And as much as I love helping everyone, and that's, that's what got me into law, I'll never stop doing that. It does become difficult when you're a single parent, you've got young children and so on. But then somebody told me about doing the law degree. I don't have an undergrad. Most of my audience knows this. I don't have an undergraduate's degree. So when I was applying at uni, they said I needed undergrad to do the postgraduate diploma in law, which is the GDL. So it's a
conversion.
Yeah, it's an accelerated course, a 3-year law degree in 9 months. And I managed to get a certificate that bypassed me doing an undergrad and going on to the postgrad and so on. And there you go, 10 odd years later, 18 years later, I then became a solicitor. I'm actually coming up to my 5 years PQE in April. Yeah. So even though I'm in my 40s, I've only been qualified almost 5 years.
Well, there's many routes into becoming a solicitor now, many more
than
absolutely. What previously was.
There's loads. Alhamdulillah, it's a lot. I wouldn't say it's a lot easier, but there's a lot more routes than before.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've talked about what it is that you wanted to get into and so on. So let's talk about what it is that you actually do now. So before we delve into that, you mentioned that you work in this area and so on. So what is it about domestic abuse that you wanted to introduce as? So you gave me a title when we were talking. What is domestic abuse? Can you give me a bit more information?
So the definition of domestic violence is any incident or pattern of incidents of controlling, coercive, threatening behaviour, violence or abuse between those aged 16 or over who are or have been in, intimate partners or family members, regardless of, gender and sexuality. The abuse can encompass, but is not limited to, psychological, physical, sexual, financial and emotional. So the different forms that domestic abuse can take are, as explained, physical abuse, which is hitting, pushing, and physical assault, really, any form of physical assault. Sexual abuse, which I'm not going to go into too much, but it's pretty much self-explanatory. Financial abuse, withholding of money, stealing money, and things like that. Coercive and controlling behaviour, which is not a very obvious form of abuse, but nevertheless is still a very serious form of abuse where, people can try to control each other, what they wear, where they go, who they talk to, including gaslighting behaviour, which is a form of psychological manipulation, where they try to make you doubt or try to confuse you. For example, somebody may have just subjected you to abuse and then turned around and said, well, I didn't really hit you, it's all in your head, so just to try to confuse you. And it also includes digital and online abuse, so harassment via social media, which is something I'm sure, a lot of people out there are aware of. Back in the days, when we were at uni and stuff, we didn't have much social media around, but now
we had none, to be fair. Well, certainly when I was in uni, we had some, but when I was in school,
not as much.
And college, there was none.
Absolutely.
It was non-existent, yeah.
So with digital and online, abuse increasing significantly and being a very serious reason of, a channel which abuse, women mainly are subjected to abuse, and it could even be men. Honor-based abuse that falls back on, on culture and beliefs within certain communities, and if they feel that the child, usually the daughter has behaved in a way that has, affected their honor, they could be, subjected to certain types of abuse, including, being locked up in rooms, prevented from going outside, having access to their friends or,
basic necessities. I'm also going to then stop you just there, if I can. Now, you said the definition. Now, that's the definition by law, correct? So as mandated by Parliament, passed in government.
I think it is. I'm not 100% sure, but this is what comes up as the main definition of domestic abuse. I mean, whether it's if this particular, what I've read, has been written in statute or not, I'm not 100%
I'm pretty sure it is, but whoever needs to look into it can look into it. Yes. I'm pretty sure that is part of the definition. Yeah. Now, in terms of, it can also include verbal and mental abuse as well. It does not have to
emotional,
be emotional. Yeah. So it doesn't have to be physical. It doesn't have to be somebody hitting you or anything like. It could be somebody who's emotionally abusing you by name calling, and it doesn't have to be someone who's in close proximity to you. It could be someone that you know at work. It could be somebody at school. It could be anybody. Right?
I mean, psychological abuse could include things like threats to commit suicide if you don't behave in a certain way. So, for example, saying, if you don't do this, I will kill myself, which is something that I often hear from, women who I work with. They say that, well, he said, if you don't do this, I will, hang myself. So that is a form of psychological and emotional abuse.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, I also wanted to, I work in employment law as well. So I do both civil litigation and employment law. And employment law, we get quite a bit of this. We get what's known as victimization. So it's not exactly in line with domestic abuse, but it's victimization. So making derogatory comments, harassment, and all of those. And sometimes these can overlap. And a lot of the times, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm no expert in this, but a lot of the times, people who are going through that, whether that's a male or a female or they, them, however they choose to identify themselves, sometimes they don't recognize it as a form of abuse. Sometimes they believe that it's just part of normal life. And also, especially when, let's just say, for example, your partner's hit you, and then within an hour, they shower you with lots of love, or they get you gifts, or they take you out for dinner. That's still abuse.
Yeah, that doesn't minimize what had happened prior to them taking you out for dinner. Maybe they feel an element of guilt, or for whatever reason they do that. It could even just be a form of control, because I would have thought that when somebody's subjected to abuse, there is something in their mind that tells them that they're being abused. But then when somebody does like a quick turn and then tries to be really nice, it's almost like it's a form of gaslighting, really, where they make you feel like, well, what I did wasn't that bad. Look, I'm a really good person. I've now taken you out for dinner and bought you a designer handbag or whatever it may be.
Yeah, it's all in your head.
But it's all in your head. But that still does not take away the fact that whatever incident that had occurred prior to the showering of the gifts or whatever is still and is abuse.
Absolutely. Now, my show is Breaking Stereotypes, right? And I'm sure some of my audience, my viewers and my listeners are probably wondering, what's that got to do with breaking stereotypes? Well, one of the biggest stereotypes that I would like to clear right now is that this does not just happen to women, or let's say to females. It can happen to men as well. I know, actually, unfortunately, I know quite a few men in my circle of friendship or acquaintances who are either suffering physical abuse or are suffering mental abuse. And it could be things like, why are you calling your friend? Why are you going out with him? You don't spend enough time with me, when that person's constantly with their partner, or it's a smack here or there, or it could be emotional abuse. Oh, but you never did this for me. You never did that for me. Or you came home from work a bit late. All of that, it can be classed as domestic abuse. So one of the biggest stereotypes I want to break is the fact that it can happen to men as well.
100%,
and men, unfortunately, because they are seen as men of strength, men who are meant to support their families, tend not to go and get that support that's there for them. But there are, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are organizations out there who would welcome these men just as much as they welcome the ladies as well. But we're talking about the gender male as well. I don't want to categorize it as men. So it could be boys, it could be young teenagers, it could be adult men and so on. Am I right when I say all of that?
Yes. I mean, anybody could be subjected to abuse regardless of your gender or age or your profession. I mean, we would think that people who are, in certain fields like doctors or lawyers may not be subjected as much because, they are assertive, but you'd be surprised, which I'm actually going to talk about a lady called Fawzia Javed, who's actually a lawyer, who's unfortunately no longer, alive. With us, because she was murdered. But I mean, I'm going to come back to that later on. But yes, it is true, men can be subjected to abuse, but the truth is that men very rarely speak up about it. We don't have many men clients. I mean, I would say 90% of our clients are women, but that doesn't mean that
they're not there.
But I just think that, there is support and there are organizations available for men, but very little in comparison to the number of the organizations that are available for women. But I mean, to seek protection, whether it's through the police or through the civil courts, it's equally, available for men and for women to access that kind of protection. Yes.
Now, before we go on to talk about what you've just mentioned, which is Fawzia Javed, I do just want to direct a question to your daughter, if I may. Alia, please. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Lovely to have you here, and it's an unfortunate subject that we are discussing, but one that's very much needed. Now, I have a 22-year-old son and 21-year-old buy one get one free, as I call them, pair of twins. Right now, I know how they feel about certain areas that I work in law. They had their stereotypes about me being a lawyer, lawyers are liars and so on, and having to explain to them that we can't actually defend anybody that says that we're guilty. We can't bring a not guilty defense and so on. So I already know how my children feel about the work, because they're proud, alhamdulillah, that we follow a code of conduct, and I have my own set of principles, as do majority of the lawyers. We have set rules to follow. We can't lie and so on. But your mother works with a very challenging area. And I'm sure she probably comes home quite drained sometimes. Apologies if you come home all fresh. But somehow with everything that you've explained,
I think it's hard to detach from it sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what I want to ask you, Alia, is how do you feel with what your mum is doing in terms of this area?
I'd definitely say there's no doubt that my mum struggles to detach from her work. Like, obviously in her field, it's not something that you can just go to work and then come home and then completely switch off from what you do. You know, she's working constantly around the clock. So she'll be doing her prep at home, her cases at home. And, when you're dealing with emotional aspects, I'd say it's not something that you can just forget about. So, the cases that she does, she really takes them on board when she speaks on behalf of her clients. She sort of brings empathy in the sense that, she really feels for her clients. So I definitely would say I feel proud of my mum, for being able to help people. The amount of people that I can see, sometimes I'll stalk the Google reviews of her firm, and people have mentioned, Rashida's done a really good job. She's changed my life. I now feel protected because I've got, like a restraining order or etc. Whatever the
result is.
The result is.
Yeah.
But I definitely say I feel really proud of my mum. I know, like I said, the downside is it's difficult to detach in that line of work. So I think she does get drained sometimes, and we understand that. But for the greater good, I think I'm definitely very proud of her.
Alhamdulillah.
So, alhamdulillah.
And you know what? Having a support system from family and friends is huge. And it's not just for you, but it's for people who are going through this as well. So before we jump into the next topic, I just want to remind everyone that you are listening and watching Breaking Stereotypes on Ramadan Radio with your host Zainab Zaeem and guest Rashida Seedat, with part-time guest, shall we say, her daughter Alia, on 87.7 FM and DAB 9B, and on Facebook and YouTube. The topic tonight is domestic abuse, what it is, what can you do if you're suffering from it, and maybe some protection that you can seek. So we do have a studio line. My show is interactive. Studio line is 0116 4822 and the text message and WhatsApp details are 077 488 55055. Equally, you can also put a comment on Facebook, Instagram or YouTube. We're also on LinkedIn, TikTok, Twitter and Spotify. My producer is wearing his headphones today compared to last week, and he will be checking for anyone who's put comments or any questions have been sent in, and he will bring those to my attention for me to speak out. So we do have 24 minutes. If anyone does have any questions, do bear in mind that if your question is quite case specific, Rashida will not be able to answer them, but she will be able to give you some general guidance as to what assistance you can seek. So do reach out if you feel you need to. Okay, Rashida, so this next topic you did mention is about Fawzia Javed. Now, when we were prepping for the show, we did talk extensively about how we should cover this because of the severe nature of the case. So this is another trigger alert, another warning alert that this case unfortunately did not end well. Fawzia Javed is no longer with us. She has passed away and gone to Allah's rahmat. So Fawzia, can you delve into that a little bit, please?
Yes, so Fawzia Javed is actually a very recent case, and just a little prayer for Fawzia, may Allah grant her the highest place in Jannah.
Ameen.
She was, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about who she was and what happened to her. I mean, there is currently a documentary on the television in relation to her case. So many people may also already be aware of what had happened to her. So Fawzia Javed unfortunately died after being pushed from the top of Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh by her husband Kashif Anwar. Fawzia was of a British Pakistani heritage, and she was only 31 years old, and she was also a lawyer. So she was an educated person. And she was from Leeds, and she was also 17 weeks pregnant at the time that she was pushed. So Fawzia's husband was found guilty of her murder after a 6-day trial in Edinburgh in April 2023. So that was just last year. So this is very, very recent. So as I explained, she was an employment lawyer. She was, 17 weeks pregnant, unfortunately, and she was pushed by her husband, and she fell from the top of the cliff. She fell from a height of 15 meters to the ground, causing several blunt force injuries to her head, I believe, and unfortunately she died as a result of that. Fawzia had been keeping a collection of evidence of her husband's abusive behaviour in the months prior to her death. When she was pushed, she was found by a passerby. At that time, I think she was in a lot of pain, and she did say to the passerby that she was pushed by her husband because she tried to end the relationship. So as she tried to end the relationship, she was, pushed. Now, this is obviously a very sad case, and this case clearly, demonstrates that it could happen within our communities too. It's not something that doesn't happen.
We're all susceptible to it,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that she was a lawyer, so it could happen to anybody regardless of your,
education background.
And your profession.
Sure.
So that's why I just wanted to talk a little bit about Fawzia, because just to show that it is something that exists in our communities and that we need to talk about it, really.
Absolutely. I mean, firstly, my apologies to our audience. That was a very tragic situation, and the details were quite graphic, but in order to be able to show you the severity of this situation, we had to touch upon this case because A, of the end result, B, that's our sister in Islam, that's our human friend, our human being. We're all human at the end of the day, and I am struggling as to how to explain it, because it is something that is quite serious. Bear with me, please. Apologies, we had just a message come in, but we will move forward from that. In terms of the Fawzia Javed case, you mentioned that there's a documentary on it right now. What's the name of the documentary?
I think it's called The Push. Just give me a moment. I'd have it written down somewhere. It's called The Push: Murder on the Cliff. I believe it's on Channel 4. I've actually not seen it myself.
All right. So people can look into that documentary if they wanted to. Rashida, we have had a question come in. I think there's one or two words missing. So I am just going to say exactly as it's come in, and maybe you might be able to figure out the missing word. I've got a feeling as to what it is. Rashida, why do people domestic violence? Is it why do people commit domestic violence?
What are their reasons?
Probably yes.
I think it's really hard to tell what the reasons are. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, so I really wouldn't be able to know how the mind works.
And plus, it's case by case.
It is, yes.
I mean, one comment I will say, and this is not news. This is not news to my audience. I've suffered from it. Suffered from it when I was growing up. Suffered from it when I was in one of my marriages. suffered from it. It happens, you know, and it can happen to everyone. We don't really know. It could be anger. It could be the person's habit. Whatever it is, it's case by case. But it's very real, and it happens to everyone. Okay, so we're going to move on. Now, you've mentioned to me Claire Wood.
Yes.
Right? So the reason why we're mentioning someone else now is Claire Wood. I'm presuming that it's from Claire's Wood that this new law came into place, which is known as Claire's Law Disclosure. So before we go into Claire Wood, can you just quickly touch upon what Claire's Law Disclosure is?
So Claire's Law is also known as a domestic violence disclosure scheme. So first of all, I'd just like to explain what a disclosure is. Which I'm sure you're aware, you know, what the term a disclosure is. It's an act of making something known or releasing information from a person or an organization which is usually confidential. So when a person seeks what is known as a Claire's Law disclosure, it's sought from the police. So it's where we ask the police to release information about a person. So it could be a victim or a potential victim of domestic abuse who wants to know about their partner's or ex-partner's previous abusive or violent offending history. Or it could be, like I said, somebody who you're currently in a relationship with, where you have concerns that that individual may be violent, abusive or controlling or coercive towards you. Yeah.
Now, I'm just going to quickly touch upon the disclosure element. Now, everybody or mostly everybody will know that when you want to obtain information about somebody else, it's actually confidential. It's as simple as that. You can't just rock up to a police station or, I don't know, ringing BT or Virgin Media and say, I want details of this person. You just absolutely cannot do that. But what this law allows you to do, because don't forget, we've got the GDPR regulations, we've got data protection involved, which we can't. But what this law allows you to do is if you've got concerns about someone that you are partnered up with and there's been maybe an incident or you thinking that there could be an incident, you know, there could be verbal or emotional abuse that might lead up to
imminent harm.
Absolutely. You can then go to the police station and most likely fill in some paperwork and ask for Claire's Law disclosure, and they will then disclose this information to you. So that's what it is in a nutshell. Right?
That's right, yeah. So there's many ways in which you can request a Claire's Law disclosure.
We've all been in this kind.
You can make the disclosure by calling 101, or you can visit your local police station and inform them that you feel that you're at a risk of harm, and that you will have to provide details of who the person is for whom you wish to obtain a disclosure, their name and maybe their date of birth and even an address. And I understand you can also make a request via some sort of an online system via the police website as well. So there's a number of ways in which you can, make this request for disclosure. Now, people might be wondering, how will this disclosure help us, and what will we get? Well, the police will, after they've done their investigations or they've checked their logs or whatever it is that they have on their system, they will get back to you and most probably ask you to go in, and then they will explain to you exactly what has been found and, if there's a history of offending, criminal convictions, etc. Once you obtain that kind of information, you will then be in a position to make a decision as to whether you want to continue that relationship or not. Because if it does flag up a very serious history of criminal, abusive behavior, then it allows somebody to rethink whether they wish to continue or not with that relationship, and that's why that was the whole purpose of the Claire's Law disclosure, because of a young lady called Claire Wood, who I will talk about a little bit more about in a little while.
Okay, brilliant. So that's the Claire's Law disclosure. Now, disclosure when I'm working in my area of law, because I do civil litigation and employment, it's slightly different. For us, disclosure is anything that we need to disclose to our opponent, so our opposing counsel. So we might have some evidence or we might have some paperwork that we need to disclose. But this is actually getting information from the police so that you're aware of what that person is about. And so that you could probably take some protective measures.
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, before we go on to the protective measures, which is orders that you can obtain from court, you mentioned Claire Wood. Can you just touch very quickly on Claire Wood?
Yeah, so Claire Wood, again, is a very tragic case, similar to, Fawzia Javed, and this disclosure was named after her. So Claire Wood was a 36-year-old woman from Yorkshire who was murdered by her ex-boyfriend George Appleton back in 2009. She met him on Facebook, and she was unaware that he had a criminal history when he befriended her. They had a 6-month relationship, which Claire finally ended after it turned, coercive. However, Appleton refused to move on, subjected her to consistent abusive behaviour such as harassment, damage to property, threats of violence and attempted assault. And although I think Claire did make a police statement and she did obtain a restraining order, Appleton's behaviour or the full extent of his previous to Claire, it finally ended with him, unfortunately, taking Claire's life. And then I understand he took his own life a few days after as well. Investigations later revealed that he in fact did have a very serious history of violent and abusive behaviour, particularly towards women, which the Greater Manchester Police were aware of but had not disclosed to Claire. Now, I think what her family did was they said, well, if Claire had known that he had this very serious and this very, very violent history, then she could have protected herself more, because obviously if somebody has a history of doing something, then they're more likely to continue to do it unless they get some serious help.
To them of support for her, and that's quite key. So a support system is essential. It's essential.
Absolutely.
But you need to be able to reach out. Again, these kind of situations, these topics are brushed under the carpet. So many people will know other people where they've gone and reached out and said, oh, she did this to me, or he did that to me. Oh, he probably just did it in a bit of anger. He didn't mean that, and so on. But these things left unchecked can build up. Now, that doesn't happen to everybody. There will be those odd occasions where it's random, it's a fluke, and it only happens the once. The person doing it can regret it, and they'll apologize, they'll move on, they'll seek help. Fantastic, well done for doing that, and so on. But there are a lot of other people who don't do that, who don't seek that help, who continue. And certainly there are those who will continue to push and push and push to see how far they can go before it actually stops. And that's what we're trying to tackle. It shouldn't have to get that far. There's no waters that need to be tested here. So let's talk about very quickly about the orders that you can obtain from the courts. Now, being a lawyer, given the fact that I don't actually deal with family law, one of the reasons why I didn't want to go into family law was because, for me, I would not be able to detach myself completely, in the sense that I'm good at what I do. And I can leave my issues at the door and so on. And if I've got personal issues, God forbid, I know I've got personal issues. I've gone through 2 divorces, and I've always gone to work without anyone even knowing what I'm going through. Alhamdulillah, Allah only gives those what He knows they can handle. Yeah. And Allah's given me that much which He knows I can handle, which is a lot. Alhamdulillah, He knows I can handle it. But when it came to choosing my areas of law, family law was one that I couldn't do. I can't really pinpoint why. It's just something that I could not do rather than did not want to do. So my heart goes out to you. If I was wearing a hat instead of a scarf, I'd tip my hat to you. Alhamdulillah, you're doing some serious work in this area. You're being a voice. I mean, one of the key questions that as lawyers always get asked is, why did you want to become a lawyer? And one of the most common answers are because we want to be an advocate for people. But at the same time, it's a business. We've got to earn money from it. It's got to pay our bills. It's bread and butter. But for you, for this, there's that reward that you've helped someone. You know, you've saved someone. But you would not be able to do this job if those protections were not there. Right? So it's not like somebody comes to you and you say, yes, I'm going to stop him or her. You can't. You have to be able to take protective measures. This is where legislation comes in. This is where the courts come in. So let's talk about the orders that you can obtain from the courts.
So I'd just like to say before we go any further that when I did my legal practice course, I actually didn't choose family law as an elective. And the reason is exactly the same reasons why you have just given, because I just didn't want to do something that I thought would have a very emotional effect on me all the time as I was doing the work. It just so happened that, you know, after I worked in many different areas, I found myself working in the area of family law, and I actually thoroughly enjoyed it, and that's the reason. And then I continued to, but I actually didn't choose family law as an elective, for the same reason what you have just said. And the other thing I'd also like to just quickly touch upon is that a lot of women who have been, I mean, and men alike, and men maybe more so, are unwilling to, accept that they've been victims of domestic violence, and especially in our community, because there's a lot of shame attached to it, simply because I think a lot of women feel that the moment they tell another person that something really bad has happened to them, they assume that people will think it's your fault. That
there's a stigma attached to it.
Absolutely.
So there's another stereotype
That's
just there.
yeah.
You know, it's the stigma that's attached to it.
A lot of people have made comments to my clients saying, well, you're a really bad person, that's why he did this to you, or he beat you up because you deserved it. You know, and that kind of thing is absolutely wrong. You know, under no circumstances should anybody be subjected to any of these kind of behaviors. It's just wrong, you know. So and it takes a lot of strength for these women to speak up, a lot.
But also, I would also like to just point out that the people who are doing this, you know, sometimes they might not know how to stop themselves. I mean, we don't know why they're doing what they're doing. No. But sometimes they might not know how to stop themselves.
No, they don't. Yeah.
So there is organizations out there for them to seek help as well, whether they're men or women, whether they're adults or teenagers, whatever age or gender, there's organizations out there to help them as well.
Mean, some of the perpetrators have underlying, addictions like alcohol or drugs,
or mental health issues,
and mental health,
yeah.
Anger management. So there are in fact anger management courses they can attend. There's places that can help them with, organizations rather, that can help them with their addictions, which could, if the underlying issue is resolved, if they control their alcohol intake or their addictions, then that could then mean that they will be able to hopefully control their anger as well. Okay, so now just quickly moving on to orders that you can obtain. So I'm just going to be very quick because I've just realized that we have very limited time. Now there's certain support that certain orders that you can get via the criminal courts and the civil courts. So the criminal courts is usually through the police, and the police will help you obtain a number of different orders. One which is known as a domestic violence protection notice, a DVPN notice. A restraining order is another one that you can get via the criminal courts. Through the civil courts, which is the type of work that we do, we often obtain non-molestation orders, which is an order which is served upon the perpetrator, the respondent, where he is not to have any contact, to keep away, not to threaten, harass, and if he breaches any of the terms of the order, then he could be fined or imprisoned.
I will just quickly say, I know that we're saying the word he, but that is just that is for just speed and efficiency, but it goes out to any gender. It's not just singled out to the men being the perpetrators. It's also men and women.
100%. I do apologize, sorry.
No need for apology.
And other orders include occupation orders, where you could be allowed to remain in your house if you've been a victim of domestic abuse, prohibited steps orders, forced marriage protection orders, which you can obtain in the event that you are being forced to marry somebody against your will, which can prevent the marriage from going ahead, and if there's a risk that you might be taken abroad. So part of the order could mean that the court orders that the passport is to be handed in to court and things like that, just to prevent that from going ahead. And now, just on a final note with regards to organizations that help women. So, moving on to, there are a number of different organisations out there that help women. Some are on a national level and some are on a local level. I think the main ones being Refuge. That offers a helpline that offers advice and support to women experiencing domestic violence. They also provide safe and emergency accommodation through a network of centres throughout the UK. And then there's also Women's Aid, which is quite a well-known organisation which provides lots of different types of help and support for women who have been victims of DV. There's also a National Domestic Abuse Helpline, which you can access. I think they've got a really good website, so I would always refer people to that website. There's an organisation called Rights of Women. There's Freeva. I'm not sure if Freeva is Leicester-based or if it's something that's national. So Freeva is basically means free from violence and abuse, so that's a really good organisation. There's another organisation called Living Without Abuse, LWA. They've got a really good website. They offer lots of different types of supports. And there's also another one in Leicester specific, which is mainly more for Black, Asian and ethnic minorities, called, I think...
is it beginning with Z?
Panagar.
Okay.
Panagar, I think it is.
Because there's one called Zintia's as well, which
I'm
familiar with Zintia's.
Okay.
And they do a lot of this work as well. So we don't have that much time on the clock. But is that all the organisations?
Just one more, which is Karma Nirvana, which supports victims of honour-based abuse.
Okay. So just very quickly, while we wrap up, I would like to say Jazakallah to both my guests, Rashida and Alia, for coming in and talking about this very sensitive topic. I'd also like to extend my sincere apologies to anyone out there if they, for some reason, feel offended by anything that we have discussed. It is a much-needed topic to discuss. It was needed. And you heard it here on Breaking Stereotypes, Ramadan Radio, 87.7 FM with your host, Zainab Zaeem. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.